Well, I started to talk about the Federalists and Hamilton and the ways that they're unhappy with the Articles. As it happened, one of the issues that came up in 1786 was trade on the Potomac River. The Potomac River is the boundary between the states of Maryland and Virginia, which, if you remember, are longtime sort of adversaries. They're always kind of rivals. And there's a question about who regulates trade on the Potomac, who sets up the rules for what ships have to do, what boats have to do, when they can go, and just the details of using the Potomac River for trade. And Maryland says, well, we can have our rules, and Virginia has their rules, and that's one of the examples of the kinds of things that go on under the Articles, that because the states each regulate trade, and here's a situation where there's rivalry, there's all kinds of rivalries, there's all kinds of animosities among the states. This is just one example of one state's mad at another because they don't like the way that they're trying to regulate trade and they think it's theirs and so forth. So there's this big issue. Hamilton was from New York, but he was a longtime friend of George Washington. He had served on his staff during the war. He'd been one of the key officers in Washington's staff. He was sort of the, his title was aide-de-camp, which doesn't mean anything, but he was sort of in charge of the business aspect of the Army. He sort of ran the finances and getting supplies and all that stuff. He was responsible for managing all of that. And Washington thought he was really bright, which he was. And so they had a long-time friendship. And Washington, of course, is from Virginia, and his home is on the Potomac. It's right on the river, his plantation, Mount Vernon. Well, together they decided, look, let's have some negotiations here. Let's meet with Maryland. Let's have some of Washington's buddies from Virginia meet with some people from Maryland and see if we can work this out and find some way to make an agreement as to how we're going to regulate trade on the Potomac, which shouldn't be a big deal, shouldn't be that hard, but it's been the kind of thing that under the Articles that couldn't get done. So they're trying to work it out. And they decided, you know what? This whole issue of trade among the states is bigger than just Maryland and Virginia. Throughout the whole country, we've got arguments among the states over regulating trade. And one state is trying to do this, and another state is trying to do this, and they're trying to get at each other. And so let's just have a Congress. Let's have a meeting for all the states to talk about this and talk about it not just with the specific issue of the Potomac, but all issues involving trade among the states, which just is not going well, and where each state is trying to do these things, and there's just all kinds of disputes and problems over that. So let's see if we can get together and talk about all of that. And you know, Americans are familiar with having what they called a Congress. They'd done that to protest the Stamp Act Congress. They'd done it to protest the Intolerable Acts, the Continental Congress. They had done it to coordinate the war effort once the war began, the Second Continental Congress. So they know how to have a Congress, and now they're using the term Congress that means a little bit more than just meeting. It's sort of become the sort of government. You can have this argument of whether you call the Articles of Confederation setting up a government, whether you call Congress a government. So, you know, the word Congress has gotten to mean a little bit more. Let's do the same thing, but just to keep the wording straight, it's just a matter of the semantics here. Let's call it a conference. Let's call it we'll have a conference, and we'll meet together, and we'll invite all the states, and we'll invite every state to send delegates. Maryland said, okay, we'll have it at our state capital. Annapolis is our state capital. We'll host it, and we'll invite everybody to come in, and we can talk about this issue as a real problem for the whole country. If it is a country, if you call it a country instead of 13 states, there's an issue whether it's one country or 13 states, but it's sort of both, and we won't worry about that. We'll just get together. So they sent out invitations for the Annapolis, what they call it, a convention. A convention. I think I used the word wrong. It's going to be a convention, and it's going to be in Annapolis. And it's going to meet in the fall of 1786. And it's a disaster. Only 5 states sent delegates. The other 8 states declined to have anything to do with it. And one of the states that declined to participate was Maryland, which is supposed to be the host. And the state of Maryland, the state legislature, passed a rule that said that nobody could use their state facilities. I mean, the place where you would have it would be the state capitol. I mean, that's where the Continental Congress had met. They'd met in the State House, the capital for the state of Pennsylvania, for all that time. And, you know, the state let them use their capital for their meetings, and that would be the logical place to have this Annapolis convention. And Maryland said, no, not in our facility. You can't use our capital. So I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know. I always tell people they met in the parking lot of a Denny's. I don't know. Anyway, so there's only 5 states there represented that send delegates to this convention. What's going on with the other states? Well, there's a couple things that you should understand that are going on at this time. For one thing, each state has its legislature. Now, these are the carryovers of the colonial assemblies. And I tried to stress for you how important those assemblies had been, and how much emphasis the people of what became the United States, how much emphasis they place in their colonial assembly, now state legislature, same thing. Each state legislature feels that we are the government for our state. We don't want anybody else to come along and tell us what to do. And we've seen evidence of the past. If you can tie this together, I want you to be able to see that this goes back to, it started, you know, when there was the Albany Plan of Union. Remember Ben Franklin's plan at Albany in 1754, which everybody had rejected, nobody wanted to do. And then throughout the whole dispute with England that led to independence, a constant theme, one of the things that was always of a serious nature, was that Americans felt Parliament was trying to take away power from their assembly. And that Parliament was trying to be the government, and that it could not tax because it didn't represent, that only their assembly could be the government for that colony. And now only the legislature can be the government for that state. It's the same thing. And that's been constant throughout. This has been going on for decades. Americans want to have their own state legislature, and they don't want anybody else controlling it. And what these state legislatures fear with the Annapolis Convention is that somehow they're going to try to take away some of their power. And they don't want that. If you want to be cynical, you could say what we've got are a bunch of little 2-bit state legislators of some of these little 2-bit states that nobody's ever heard of. And we got our little government here, and we don't want anybody else taking away our power. Because if we do, if we can't have our own state legislature, what can we be? You know, we're the legislators. We're big people. We're important. We run our state. And if you want to, again, be really cynical, it's because, you know, they can maybe make a little money on this, either legally or illegally. Doesn't matter. They just have a chance. But it only works if they still have a legislature, if they have power. And if they have the right to appoint state officials, and the power to make laws for their state, and then power to, you know, maybe accept bribes. And I don't like to remind you over and over again, but I hope you learned that word and you know the importance of that word for this class, for those of you who want to get an A. So, you know, they don't want to give up any of their power, And they've never wanted to give up their power. And now they see that just as, England was a threat to it, Parliament was a threat to their power, now they fear that this Annapolis Convention might cook up something. They don't know what, but they don't want to find out. They don't want to take any chances that the convention is going to lead to something that might limit their power. So that's one issue. Another issue is that many of these people, I'm calling them Federalists, maybe a little bit prematurely, but the Federalists, have been complaining that the problems that we had and all the difficulties that we're facing, especially economically and diplomatically, it's all because of Republican government. And many of them have said, maybe this idea of a republic isn't so good after all. Look at what's happening. And people in Britain had been saying forever that, oh, you guys, if you try to have a republic, you'll be sorry. Republics can't work. Republics can't govern. In order to have a real government, you've got to have a king. You've got to have a monarchy. You've got to have somebody in power. You can't have these damned republics where, it's the representatives of the people. The people are a bunch of drunks or whatever, You can't have that. It won't work. Republics don't work. And, and even people who were really very pro-republic were saying, hey, maybe the British are right. Look at how badly things are going. Maybe the republic is not a solution after all. Maybe we can't have a republic. Maybe we've got to have a strong man who can say, the power is mine. I have the power, absolute power. So some of the Federalists had sort of been on record and were quoted in papers and so forth as making statements that suggested that maybe we're not going to keep a republic. And one of the fears is that a lot of Americans had in 1786 was that what's going on at the convention in Annapolis, what those guys are up to, is basically to reestablish monarchy in America. And that's no. So they won't go. So the delegates got there in Annapolis and wherever they met, and they talked around and they said, well, this can't work. Let's go back home. We'll have to start from scratch and see what we can do here, because this obviously is not working. But Hamilton said, wait a minute, slow down. Let's see if we can salvage something from this mess. He said, maybe the problem is, and he's probably right about this, Hamilton was a real smart guy and he knew what was going on. He said, maybe the problem is that nobody wants to have anything to do with us because they don't trust us, because they don't know what we're up to. They think we might be up to something evil, that we might be plotting to take away their power of their legislature, or that we might be plotting to establish a monarchy. And so, because we just said, hey, just come and we'll talk. We didn't say what we're going to talk about. We didn't say what we're going to do. So maybe we just need to make that clear. Let's try again. Let's have another convention. And we'll send out invitations and do the same thing again. But this time, we'll specify what we're going to do. We're going to say what we're going to do, and that'll make it more reassuring for people to participate if they know what's going to happen. And what we're going to do is very simple. We're going to amend the Articles. That's all. We're going to amend the Articles of Confederation. And an amendment to the Articles of Confederation has to be ratified just like the Articles had been in the first place. And that means that every state, through its legislature, has to ratify an amendment to the Articles. And that means that every state legislature has the power to prevent the ratification of any amendments that we come up with. So they don't have to worry about it. If we do something at the convention, this next convention that we're going to have, the follow-up convention, if If there's a state legislature that doesn't want to do with it, they just don't have to ratify it, and they can stop it. So they don't have to worry that they still have power to stop anything that the convention might do. So there's no reason not to participate. And the only thing we're going to do is amend the articles. So the invitations go out in the fall of 1786. Now we don't know what would have happened if that's all that had gone on. We don't know if that would have reassured state legislatures, if some of those 8 that refused to participate in the Annapolis Convention, if they would have said, "Oh, okay, it's fine. We'll go to this other convention. I think it's going to be in Philadelphia. They're going to have this follow-up convention in Philadelphia, starting in May of 1787, starting in the spring of 1787. We don't know what would have happened if something else had not come along. But something else happened in the winter of 1786-87 that we believe convinced a lot of people in the country and many other state legislatures, convinced them, hey, we better send delegates to the Philadelphia Convention because we got problems in this country. We got to deal with it. What happened took place in western Massachusetts, around Springfield. That was an area where there were a lot of farmers, and I have told you, if you remember, that Massachusetts farmers are really hurting. This is a group of people who are struggling. I mean, a lot of people are hurting as a result of the articles and all the problems that we've got, that we've talked about. And I've spent the last week or so talking about all these problems. And a lot of people are hurting, but among them are farmers in Massachusetts. And they got 2 big problems. One is many of them are in debt. They borrowed money during the war to acquire more property, and they've taken out mortgages that they can't afford to pay. And so they've got these mortgages that are in arrears, and legally their mortgage holders, the people they borrowed the money from, have a legal right to foreclose on that mortgage and take possession of the property. And the only thing is that they're just not, because it's not to their advantage to do that, but so everything's just sort of sitting there. But the farmers are in bad shape, because any time that the mortgage holders decide to foreclose, they can. The law is on their side. I mean, these guys had signed a mortgage and they haven't paid it, so and they know it, and their position is very, very insecure. And the other problem is the state has very high taxes, and farmers are having a hard time paying their taxes. Well, suddenly in the summer, or in that winter, there was a time when many mortgage holders decided to foreclose. They've had the right to do it all along, they just haven't done it. Now they're doing it. And this is a real threat to farmers. So what did they do? They took over the courthouse in Springfield and wouldn't allow it to meet. One way to protect their farms is not to allow the law to be enforced. Don't let the lawyers come in, don't let the judges come in and end orders. So there's a rebellion in western Massachusetts led by a guy named Shays. Shays' rebellion breaks out in western Massachusetts.